Hey y'all. So in this last short lecture from chapter 12, actually in this last short lecture of them all, I'm going to talk about conflict and power, as well as talk about skills that you can use for effective conflict resolution. So let's talk about power. So power, as we define it in communication, is the ability to control the behavior of another person. Now, there are different ways that we can exert our power. There is, for example, the direct application of power. Now, this occurs in a conflict situation, right? When you use resources at your disposal to make someone else comply, regardless of what they want to do. So a direct application of power between a parent and a child might be spanking them and sending them to their room. That's where you're using a direct application of your power. You're using the resources, the physical resources at your disposal to compel them to do what you want them to do, regardless of what they want. Now, we could also talk about direct and virtual uses of power. Now, with the direct and virtual use, this is where you communicate the potential use of a direct application of power. This is where you tell your kid, instead of just spanking them, this is where you tell them, I'm going to spank you if you don't clean up your room. Right? So this is more the threat of a potential use than the actual use of power. Now, we also talk about indirect applications of power, and these are harder to achieve, right? This is where we employ power without making its employment explicit. So this is where we get people to do what we want them to do without really them realizing it, right? So this can happen in a number of ways, and one of the ways this happens is through relational messages. A relational message is a message that defines a relationship and implicitly states that the sender has the power to do it. So, for example, in a relational, a relational message might be something like, letting, if you sit down and you verify with someone, for example, like, hey, we're not seeing other people, right? We're just one-on-one. That message defines the relationship. Right, it's a monogamous relationship, and it sort of implicitly states that you have the right to define it, right? That you have an interest that allows you to define that relationship. So even asking a question can be it's sort of a form of an exertion of power through a relational message. Now, of course, there are also many hidden uses of power, and this is the power where one person relationship avoids decisions in the interest of one of the parties. It's unobtrusive power. It's power that is not really noticed, right? So, oftentimes we'll see people foregoing their right to make a decision in order to help someone else in the relationship. And so this would be considered a hidden use, or an unobtrusive, use of power. All right, so let's talk about some skill sets for effective conflict management. So some general steps, good rules, right? Best practices. The first one is to lighten up, right? So you got to try and stay calm as confrontations and conflict escalates. We want to acknowledge what the other person has to say, and we want to try and reframe it. Now, you know from previous chapters that reframing is really just taking a negative, for example, and turning it into a positive. And that's what you want to do at the onset of conflict. And while you do this, by all means, you want to try and avoid sounding sarcastic, and you want to watch your nonverbal cues. You want to watch your body language, your facial expressions, the tone of your voice, and so on, so that it seems like you're sincere. Now, you also want to try and express goodwill. So to do this, you want to focus on areas where you agree. And obviously, this can be difficult. If someone is criticizing you, it can be difficult to agree with them about their points, even if you think that they might be right. So when you can, you want to say positive things about the other person, and mix this praise, these positive things, with whatever complaints you have. You remember the magic ratio, right? You remember that we need to say good things in order for people to really absorb the negative things, right? And not have those sort of outweigh the positive parts of our messages. Ask questions, perception checking, right? Focus on the other person. Think about what they said. Paraphrase, ask them questions to make sure you understood what they had to say. And then ask them, what could we do to make this better? What can I do to make this better? Right? Always try and listen. Remember, there's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing, everyone does all the time, right? That's just sound hitting your eardrums and conveying the message to your brain. Listening is really taking the time and effort to hear what a person is saying and then make sense of it, to think about it, right? It's almost impossible to truly manage conflict effectively unless we listen to the other person. And sometimes, frankly, just listening can help resolve the problem, because it's listening, right, and acknowledging what the other person is saying. These are confirming behaviors. They create positive communication climates. They let people know that you value them. And if the problem is that they don't feel valued, this can solve the problem in and of itself. Of course, whenever possible, you want to practice cultural sensitivity. Be mindful of your own culture's norms and assumptions. So if you're in this workplace today, where we know up to 30% of the current workforce is made up of people from different cultures, cultures unlike your own, right? You got to be mindful of your own culture's norms. Slow down your judgment of other people. Don't be ethnocentric. And if you have to, right, ask yourself the question: am I being ethnocentric? Am I just assuming that my culture is the best? And if so, get away from that behavior and try and consider the culture of others. All right, that's it for our short lectures. I hope you learned something, and thanks for checking them out.